A giant rancher and his 19-year-old daughter rode into town for supplies, but found a 30-year-old Chinese bride begging for bread. What rancher did shocked the whole town. The spring sun rested soft and low over the frontier town, painting the world in a quiet gold that clung to dust and horses alike. A wagon rolled slow through the muddy street, pulled by a single chestnut mare whose flanks gleamed with the sweat of long miles. At the reins sat a man broad as an oak and silent as one, Andrew Boone, a rancher whose name the plains carried on wind and rumor. Beside him, his daughter Mary sat straight-backed, her braids shining like wheat in the morning light. She was 19, but her eyes had seen too many winters, too many graves behind their house on the ridge. The town looked the same as ever, rough plank walls, the blacksmith's fire like a dragon's breath, a preacher's whitewashed chapel half hidden behind a saloon that never slept. The signboard of the general store creaked on its chain. Mary's gaze followed the drift of wind that carried flour dust and horse sweat through the air. Andrew guided the mare to a stop by the hitching post. His shoulders carried the stillness of a man who'd long stopped expecting surprises. "Get what we came for, girl," he said quietly, voice low and steady as worn leather. "Flour, sugar, oil. Then we head home before the rain catches up." Mary nodded and climbed down. Her boots sank in soft mud. She liked the hum of life here, the gossip, the rattling carts, but even that felt hollow since her mother passed. She could hear her father breathing beside her, slow and careful, as if speaking too loud might shatter something unseen between them. Then came the sound, a faint rustle near the bakery door. She turned. In the narrow alley, beside the stacked flour barrels, a woman knelt in the dirt. Her dress once had color, perhaps red or rose, now faded to the shade of ash. Black hair spilled loose down her shoulders. She was thin, her hands trembling as she reached into a wooden bin where stale crusts had been thrown away. A man at the bakery laughed. "Ain't you got manners, China girl? Dogs eat out of there, not people." Another joined in. Maybe her husband didn't teach her proper. If she had one. Mary froze. She'd seen beggars before, railway drifters, miners after bad luck, but never someone digging through trash with that kind of quiet desperation, like she was afraid to take what she needed. The woman's face lifted, pale beneath the dirt, her eyes dark and endless. They caught the morning light like wet stone. Andrew stepped up beside his daughter. His jaw tightened. "Don't look too long," he muttered. "Ain't our business." But Mary couldn't turn away. The woman's fingers broke a loaf in half, the crust crumbling like dust. She ate so slowly, as if swallowing shame with each bite. The men nearby laughed louder. One tossed an old heel of bread near her feet. "Here, little bird. Peck that one too." Something inside Mary snapped, a quiet, sudden kind of anger. She walked forward, clutching the fresh loaf she'd just bought. Her boots splashed mud on her skirt, but she didn't stop until she stood beside the woman. She knelt and placed half the loaf in her hands. The woman looked up, startled, eyes glistening. "No, no," she whispered in broken English. "You keep." Mary shook her head. "You need it more." The bakery men fell silent for a moment, discomfort flickering across their faces. One spat in the dirt and turned away. The other muttered something about fools and left. Andrew exhaled, long and low, then stepped off the wagon. The boards creaked under his weight. He walked to the woman and, without speaking, took off his coat and laid it around her shoulders. His hands were huge, scarred from years of labor, yet careful as he draped the fabric so it covered her fully. The woman's lips trembled. She pressed her palms together and bowed her head. "Thank you," she said softly. Andrew didn't answer. He simply looked at her, then at the onlookers who pretended not to stare. His eyes, gray as the storm clouds gathering beyond the ridge, said what words could not. He turned to Mary. "Help her up." Mary slid an arm around the woman's shoulders. She felt the bones beneath her thin dress, the fragility of someone who had carried hunger too long. Together they led her toward the wagon. A preacher's wife standing on the porch of the mercantile gasped. "Andrew Boone, that's shameful. Bringing such a one into your company." Andrew didn't glance her way. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "shame's in the eyes that refuse to see." They lifted the woman onto the wagon seat. She held the bread as if it were something holy, crumbs clinging to her fingers. Mary took the reins while her father loaded their supplies in silence. The mare snorted and shifted. As the wagon rolled down the street, the people of the town watched, some whispering, others looking away. The woman kept her head low, face half hidden behind her hair. Mary wanted to speak but didn't know how. She only knew she'd never forget the sound of that laughter behind the bakery or the way her father's coat looked on the stranger's shoulders. When they reached the edge of town, Andrew slowed the wagon. The open prairie spread before them, bright and endless beneath the sun. The air smelled of rain far away. He turned slightly toward the woman. "You got a name?" She hesitated, fingers tightening around the loaf. "Jing Lin," she said softly, syllables lilting like a song half remembered. Andrew nodded once. "Where you bound for, Jing Lin?" Her gaze drifted to the horizon. Nowhere left. Silence filled the space between them. The wheels creaked, the wind moved through the grass. Mary looked from one to the other, the strong man whose heart had rusted shut and the woman whose spirit still glowed faintly through its cracks. After a long while, Andrew clicked his tongue and urged the horse forward. "Then you'll ride with us," he said, almost to himself. The woman blinked, eyes wide. I not." He raised a hand. "Ain't asking for thanks." Mary smiled faintly, relief blooming in her chest. She offered Jing Lin the water canteen. "Drink," she whispered. "We got a long road." The wagon rolled toward the open hills, leaving behind the whispers and the bakery's laughter. Dust rose in soft curls behind them, catching sunlight like smoke. Jing Lin sipped water, her lips trembling. She looked at Mary, then at Andrew, as if trying to understand why they'd stopped for her when the world had not. Andrew kept his eyes on the trail ahead. He didn't see the way she watched him, half afraid, half grateful, as if trying to decide whether mercy could be real. Hours later, as the first drops of spring rain began to fall, Mary pulled her shawl tighter. "Pa," she said quietly, "you think they'll talk?" "They always talk," he answered. "Ain't what they say that matters, it's what we choose to remember." Jing Lin closed her eyes and leaned back against the wagon's side, the coat still wrapped around her. For the first time in months, her breathing steadied. She let the rain touch her face, the cool drops mingling with tears she didn't try to hide. The trail climbed slowly toward the high meadows. The scent of wet earth filled the air, rich and forgiving. Mary thought about the woman beside her, the way hunger had hollowed her yet couldn't steal her quiet grace. By the time they reached the ridge, the sky had broken open into a gray mist. Andrew halted the wagon. Below, their ranch waited in a valley of young grass and cottonwoods just budding green. Smoke from the chimney rose straight into the air. Mary glanced at Jing Lin, who clutched the crust of bread in her lap like something precious. Her father spoke softly, almost as if to the wind. "You can stay till you find where you're going." The woman looked at him, her voice a whisper. "Maybe I already find." He didn't answer, but something flickered in his eyes, a brief light, then gone. The horse moved again, hooves muffled in the damp earth. Behind them, the town's laughter had long since faded, replaced by the slow, steady rhythm of rain. And somewhere between those falling drops and the silence that followed, a story began that none of them could yet name, only feel like the first breath of spring after a long, bitter winter. The first morning at the Boone Ranch broke with the scent of damp soil and thawed grass. Spring light streamed through the cottonwoods that bent lazily toward the creek, their young leaves trembling like small, green coins in the wind. Smoke from the chimney drifted in thin ribbons. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled low, and the stranger they had brought home slept on a makeshift cot near the hearth. Andrew stood in the doorway, his hat in his hand, watching her as if unsure whether she was real. She looked small against the rough log walls, her face still smudged from travel, but there was a calmness in the way her hands rested over her stomach, fingers curled lightly as though holding something precious. His coat, still around her shoulders, had slipped down one arm. He thought about taking it back, but the sight of her shivering stopped him. Mary moved quietly behind him, stirring the morning's coffee. "She doesn't eat much," Mary whispered. "Tried to give her stew last night. Only took a few spoonfuls." Andrew nodded, eyes fixed on the firelight dancing across the woman's cheek. "She'll eat when she's ready." He stepped out onto the porch, the boards cool beneath his bare feet. The ranch stretched before him, open, familiar, unchanging. Yet something about it felt different now, like a song he'd heard all his life but suddenly understood. The mare grazed near the fence line, and the chickens scratched at the earth. Everything was the same, except the silence. It wasn't lonely anymore. By mid-morning, Jing Lin woke. The fire had burned low, and Mary sat sewing at the table. When the woman tried to rise, she winced, touching her side. Mary was beside her at once. "Easy," she said gently, though the woman probably understood little. "You're safe here." Jing Lin's lips parted in a small, unsure smile. "Safe," she repeated, the word strange but soft in her mouth. Mary nodded. "That's right." They shared breakfast in near silence. Andrew joined them after tending the stock. He sat across from Jing Lin, his massive hands dwarfing the tin cup of coffee. She looked at him once, shyly, and then back at her bowl of porridge. The flicker of the fire painted her eyes gold. Andrew cleared his throat. "You can stay," he said, not looking at her, "till you find your feet." She bowed her head slightly. "Thank you." The words hung in the air like a fragile bridge between two worlds. Days passed in a rhythm both strange and tender. Jing Lin swept the cabin floors, her movements graceful and deliberate. She patched torn curtains and washed dishes with care that made even simple chores feel sacred. At dusk, she walked by the creek, the hem of her faded dress catching the breeze. Mary often joined her, picking wildflowers and naming them one by one, while Jing Lin repeated the names in her soft accent: Daisy, Primrose, Clover, each syllable a prayer to belong. The evenings were the hardest for Andrew. He'd sit on the porch with his pipe, staring out across the darkening fields, listening to faint laughter from inside. It had been years since laughter filled that cabin. The sound unsettled him in ways he couldn't name. He tried to tell himself it was enough just to offer shelter, that he owed nothing more. But when Jing Lin stepped out sometimes to hang washed clothes by lamplight, her shadow crossing his boots, he felt something quiet stir in him, a pull both frightening and familiar. One afternoon, he came back from the south field to find her kneeling by the fence, planting seeds in the soil. The sunlight caught in her hair. She whispered something he couldn't understand, pressing her palms together before tucking another seed beneath the earth. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice softer than he meant. She glanced up, startled, then smiled faintly. "Pray," she said, pointing to the dirt. "For grow." He nodded slowly. "Good kind of prayer." She held out a seed in her palm, small as a tear. "You also," she said, guiding his rough hand toward the ground. He hesitated, then knelt beside her. Their fingers brushed. The soil was cool and damp beneath his calloused skin. For a moment, everything stilled, the creek, the wind, even his thoughts. Mary watched from the porch, her lips curving into a quiet smile. She didn't know what passed between them, only that the air around her father seemed lighter afterward. When the sun slipped low, Jing Lin brought tea to the porch. She set the small porcelain cups she'd found in her bag, chipped but delicate. Andrew took one, the steam curling like ghosts between them. "Tea," she said softly. He nodded. "Thank you." They sat without speaking, the sound of the creek winding through the hush. The cottonwoods whispered above, leaves rustling like old secrets. Andrew looked toward the horizon, then back at her. She wasn't just surviving now, she was beginning to live. But peace in that country never lasted long. One evening, a rider appeared, a man from town with a letter and a smirk. He dismounted by the fence and called out, "Boone, folks are talking. Said you got yourself a China wife up here." Andrew's shoulders stiffened. Mary came to the door, her face pale. Jing Lin stood behind her, clutching a dish towel. "She's under my roof," Andrew said flatly. "That's all anyone needs to know." The man shrugged, handing him the letter. "Sheriff says the town council's uneasy. Says she's not registered proper. Might be best if she moves along." Andrew stared at the paper, then tore it in two. "You tell the sheriff my land's outside his reach." The man looked past him to Jing Lin. "She don't belong, Boone. You know that." Andrew stepped closer, the weight of him enough to make the rider back away. "Ain't your business who belongs." When the man rode off, the silence felt heavy. Jing Lin turned away, eyes bright with shame. She whispered something in her language, too fast for them to catch. That night, she sat by the window long after the lamp was blown out. Andrew couldn't sleep. He watched her shadow in the moonlight, the slope of her shoulders, the way she pressed her hands together like she was trying to hold her heart from falling apart. He wanted to tell her not to mind the world, that she had nothing to prove. But he'd never been a man of many words, and the right ones never came. In the morning, he found her at the creek, washing clothes. She looked up when he approached, water dripping from her fingers. "I make trouble," she said quietly. "Town angry. You lose peace." Andrew shook his head. "Ain't much peace to lose." She blinked, uncertain. "You not angry?" He bent, picking up a wet shirt from the grass. "No, ma'am. Angry's easy. You deserve better than that." For the first time, she smiled fully, small and radiant, like sunrise through fog. That evening, rain began again, soft and steady. The cabin filled with the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. Mary sat near the hearth reading aloud from an old Bible, the words slow and melodic. Jing Lin listened, her head tilted, repeating a few words now and then, learning their sounds. Andrew watched them both, his heart stirring in quiet confusion. He'd thought of himself as too old for change, too scarred for tenderness. Yet here they were, filling his home with warmth he hadn't known he missed. When the fire burned low, he turned to Jing Lin. "You ever think of leaving?" he asked quietly. She looked into the flames for a long time. "Once," she said, almost a whisper. "But not now." Something unspoken passed between them, something that neither dared name. Outside, the rain turned heavier, drumming against the roof like a heartbeat. The cottonwoods swayed, their branches heavy with water. Andrew rose to add another log to the fire, but before he could, she reached out and laid her hand on his sleeve. Her touch was light, but it stopped him still. "Thank you," she murmured. He met her eyes. "For what?" "For see me." The words sank deep into the quiet. Mary, watching from the loft, held her breath. She didn't yet know what that moment meant, but she knew it was changing everything. When Andrew stepped outside later, the rain had eased. The moon broke through the clouds, laying silver across the fields. He looked toward the creek, where the seedlings she'd planted had begun to push through the soil. Small, green, fragile things, reaching for light. He smiled to himself, the expression rare and fleeting. Then his gaze drifted to the road leading back to town, dark, winding, waiting. He didn't know yet that the same people who'd mocked that woman would soon test how far mercy could stretch before it bled. The wind rustled through the cottonwoods, whispering her name into the night. The whispers began as faint as dust stirring behind the wagons, soft, sly, and slow to fade. By the time Andrew Boone rode into town again, they had grown teeth. Eyes followed him from behind curtains, from the corners of the saloon, from the women gathered near the chapel gate. It was no longer just a story of a rancher and his daughter. It was the tale of a man keeping a foreign woman under his roof, a tale retold in half-smiles and pitying glances. He heard them as he hitched his horse outside the store. "She's there, you know. The China woman. Lives with him like a wife." Another voice, lower but sharper, followed. "Some men got no shame. Guess grief makes fools of them." Andrew didn't turn. He stepped inside, bought what he came for, salt, nails, kerosene, and left without a word. But the sound of their laughter followed him like burrs on a coat. That evening, back at the ranch, the sky burned copper over the fields. He sat on the porch, the boards warm beneath his boots, and watched Jing Lin hang laundry in the fading light. Her sleeves rolled to the elbow. She worked with a quiet grace that made even the simplest movement beautiful. Mary hummed softly as she helped, her braids swinging as she passed the line. Andrew tried to tell himself the talk didn't matter, that he'd weathered worse in his life. But the words had burrowed deep. It wasn't pride that hurt, it was fear. Fear that Jing Lin would hear them, that the fragile peace she had begun to find here would crack under their cruelty. When he looked up, she was watching him. Her gaze lingered, questioning, sensing the weight in him. He forced a small nod, a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes, then stood and went inside. That night he couldn't sleep. The cabin was dark except for the fire's dying glow. Jing Lin's soft breathing came from the cot across the room. Mary was asleep in the loft. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods outside, and Andrew felt that same whisper in his chest, restless, uneasy. He rose quietly and stepped out into the cool air. The moon was high, lighting the fields silver. For a long time, he stood there, staring at the horizon where the town lay hidden in darkness. Behind him, a door creaked. Jing Lin stepped out, shawl around her shoulders, hair loose and shining in the moonlight. She said nothing, just joined him on the porch. They stood side by side, their silence soft as breath. "You hear them, don't you?" he asked finally. She looked at him, then away. "Some words need no hear," she said gently. "They walk on faces." He closed his eyes, the truth of it cutting deep. "Maybe I should have left you in peace," she added after a moment. "World not like woman like me near man like you." Andrew turned to her, voice rougher than he meant. "Don't you ever say that. Ain't the world's right to tell you where you belong." Her eyes shimmered in the pale light. "But you hurt because me." He wanted to deny it, but the lump in his throat said otherwise. He looked down at his hands, scarred, clumsy things that could build fences but not mend hearts. "Sleep," he said quietly. "It's late." But neither of them did. The next morning, Mary went to town for supplies. She returned with her face pale, eyes rimmed with red. She slammed the door harder than needed and dropped the sack of flour on the table. "They called her filth, Pa," she said, voice shaking. "Said she's got no right to eat white bread or wear your coat. The preacher's wife said it's sin to let her stay." Andrew's jaw clenched. "You talk back." "I did," Mary said, trembling. "Told them she's kinder than all of them put together. But they just laughed." He reached for her shoulder, steadying her. "Let it be," he murmured. "We'll keep to ourselves." But Jing Lin, standing by the hearth, heard every word. The color drained from her face. Later that night, while they slept, she sat by the firelight and folded her few belongings: a comb, a scarf, a pair of gloves Mary had given her. She placed a note on the table, written in her uneven English. "I go. You kind people. But I bring hurt. Not belong." By dawn, she was gone. The sound of her absence hit like thunder. Andrew found the note first. He read it twice before the meaning sank in. The coffee boiled over the stove and hissed out, forgotten. Mary's cry broke the silence. "She left. Pa, she left." He didn't answer. He grabbed his hat, his gun belt, and was out the door before the words finished echoing. The morning was cold, mist rising off the creek. Her tracks were light but clear, leading down the road toward town. He followed fast, his horse's hooves pounding mud. The sky grew heavy with the promise of rain. When he reached the outskirts of town, he saw her. She was walking along the railway line, coat slipping from her shoulders, hair plastered with drizzle. She looked small against the endless gray, but her steps were steady, as if she had accepted her punishment. He slowed his horse, dismounted, and called softly, "Jing Lin." She turned. Her face was streaked with tears and rain. "I not want make trouble," she said. "People laugh you. I go." He took a step closer, mud clinging to his boots. "You think I care what they say?" "You must," she whispered. "You not talk, not smile. Your eyes heavy." He swallowed hard. "I don't smile because I don't know how anymore. Been too long. But you," he paused, his voice cracking, "you brought something back I thought was dead." She shook her head. "I only bring shame." Andrew dropped to one knee in the wet dirt, hat in his hands. The rain began to fall harder, soaking them both. "No, Jing Lin. You bring mercy. And I ain't letting mercy walk away." For the first time, her composure broke. A sob escaped her, muffled behind trembling hands. He rose and took her by the shoulders, steady but gentle. "You come home," he said. "Not because I pity you, but because home ain't bricks and wood. It's people who see you." She stared at him, eyes wide with disbelief, then nodded slowly. They rode back together, the rain turning the earth slick and dark. Townsfolk stared as they passed, the rancher's hand around the reins, the foreign woman seated before him, soaked to the bone but sitting tall. No one spoke. Some lowered their heads. A few turned away. At the edge of the hill, she looked back once at the place that had shamed her. Then she let out a breath she'd been holding since the day she arrived. When they reached the cabin, Mary ran to them, tears and laughter tangled together. She threw her arms around Jing Lin, who clung back as though holding life itself. Andrew watched them in silence. The rain eased, leaving the air washed and new. He glanced toward the horizon, where the sun was fighting its way through the clouds, and saw a faint arc of color forming there. Jing Lin followed his gaze. Her voice came soft, trembling. "Rainbow," she said. He nodded. "Means storms don't last forever." The wind carried the scent of wet earth and smoke, and for the first time in years, Andrew Boone smiled, a real one, faint and raw, but alive. Yet deep in the quiet of his heart, he knew the world hadn't forgiven them. It never would. And somewhere beyond that horizon, another storm was waiting, its whisper already curling through the air like the warning of a reckoning yet to come. The first light of dawn spilled through the cabin window, laying soft gold over the worn table where 3 cups of tea sat cooling. Outside, the cottonwoods were alive with new leaves, whispering in a mild spring breeze. Mary Boone sat by the window, braiding her hair, her reflection trembling faintly in the glass. She could hear her father moving about outside, boots crunching gravel, his deep voice low as he spoke to the horses. The rhythm of the ranch was unchanged, yet every morning felt new now, warmer, calmer, touched by something she had no word for. Jing Lin was kneeling near the hearth, arranging flowers she'd gathered from the edge of the creek. Their colors, white, yellow, and faint pink, seemed to bring the outdoors into the heart of the home. She wore a simple blue dress that Mary had mended for her, and her hair was tied with that red silk ribbon, now clean and shining. She looked peaceful, though the peace seemed learned, not born, a quiet she had built from pain and patience. Andrew entered, brushing the dust from his hat, his frame filling the doorway like a wall of steady light. He paused when he saw them, a faint smile ghosting across his face. "You've both been busy," he said. Jing Lin looked up, her voice soft as a ripple. "Home must look happy," she said, her English halting but sure. Andrew nodded, touched by her care, though words never came easily for him. He crossed to the stove and poured coffee, then handed a cup to her. Their fingers brushed, and for the briefest moment, their eyes met. Mary caught it, the tenderness neither dared name, and looked down to hide her smile. After breakfast, the 3 of them worked in the garden. The seeds Jing Lin and Andrew had planted together had begun to sprout, small green shoots pushing bravely through the dark soil. Mary watched her father pause now and then, his gaze softening as Jing Lin moved between rows. It was as if the earth itself had chosen to bloom again under her care. By noon, a light wind swept across the fields, carrying the scent of wet grass and lilac. Jing Lin lifted her face to it, eyes closed, as though listening to something beyond hearing. When they returned to the porch, a rider was waiting. It was the preacher, his coat black against the pale horizon. His horse stamped impatiently, sensing its rider's unease. Andrew set down the pail he carried, his expression tightening. "Morning, Reverend," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Andrew," the man greeted with stiff courtesy, his gaze flicking past him to Jing Lin. "I came because there's talk again. People say things that shouldn't be said. You know how this land is. Folks judge what they don't understand. It'd do everyone good if matters were made lawful." Andrew said nothing for a moment. The preacher's meaning was clear. He looked toward Jing Lin, who stood at the porch railing, watching quietly, her hands clasped. The red ribbon fluttered in her hair like a flag in a hesitant breeze. "I didn't bring her here for talk or pity," Andrew said finally. "She's earned her place same as any of us." The preacher sighed. "I believe that. But if you care for her, make it right in the eyes of God. Then no one can speak against her." Mary's heart caught. She looked from her father to Jing Lin, who had lowered her eyes. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Andrew nodded once. "We'll come into town Sunday." The preacher tipped his hat and rode off. Dust lifted behind him, swirling golden in the light. When he was gone, silence hung heavy between them. Andrew turned to Jing Lin. "You don't have to," he said quietly. "Ain't no chain in my offer." She hesitated, then met his gaze. "No chain," she said. "Only heart." That evening, the cabin glowed warm in lamplight. Mary brushed her hair by the window while her father sat by the fire, running his thumb over a small wooden ring box he had carved himself. Jing Lin sat opposite, mending one of his shirts. The air hummed with the kind of quiet that comes before something sacred. Andrew cleared his throat. "Tomorrow we ride early," he said softly. "Best we face what comes with the sun." Jing Lin nodded, folding the shirt neatly. "I wear red," she said, a faint smile in her voice. "In my land, red means life." Mary watched them both, her chest tight with emotion she couldn't name. For the first time in years, the word family felt whole again. Morning came bright and still. The town sat ahead, washed clean by rain. When they rode in, people stopped to stare, first at Andrew, then at the woman beside him, her red ribbon shining like a flame. Whispers rippled through the street, but no one spoke aloud. Even the sheriff, standing near the saloon, only touched his hat and stepped aside. The preacher waited at the chapel door. He looked uneasy, but when Jing Lin stepped down and stood beside Andrew, his eyes softened. "Are you ready?" he asked. Andrew nodded. "Been ready longer than I knew." Inside, the chapel smelled of pine and old dust. Mary sat in the front pew, hands clasped tightly. The preacher began the ceremony in a low, steady voice, the words rising and falling like wind in the rafters. Jing Lin's eyes shimmered as she repeated her vows, each word spoken slowly, carefully, like she was carving it into time itself. When the preacher finished, Andrew slid the wooden ring onto her finger. "It fit perfectly," he said. "You got my name now, but truth is, you've had my heart for a while already." A tear escaped down her cheek. "Then I keep both safe," she whispered. The preacher closed the Bible and smiled faintly. "You may call her Mrs. Boone." Applause would have been too loud for that moment. Instead, the quiet filled with breath and birdsong drifting through the open windows. Mary stood and crossed to them, eyes glistening. She hugged Jing Lin first, then her father. "Welcome home," she said softly. When they stepped back outside, the sun was high and the air sweet with new blossoms. The townsfolk who'd gathered at a distance didn't jeer or gossip. Some nodded, others simply turned away in silence. The world hadn't changed, but something in it had softened. They rode home slow, the horses' hooves sinking into warm earth. Jing Lin held Mary's hand as they crossed the meadow. "I not think dream can feel so real," she said. Mary smiled. "Sometimes it takes a storm to wake it." That evening, a celebration of sorts filled the cabin. They shared stew, laughed quietly, and opened the door wide so the scent of lilac and rain could wander in. Andrew sat back in his chair, watching the two women move about the room, their laughter mingling like two notes of the same song. Later, when the stars came out, Mary found her father outside near the fence line. He stood looking toward the horizon, where the last light of day bled into dusk. "She's happy," Mary said softly. He nodded. "So am I. Didn't think I'd ever say that again." Mary leaned against the post beside him. "You named her your wife today," she said, smiling. "But I think she was that long before anyone knew." He chuckled, low and warm. "Maybe. Some things don't need a name till the world's ready to hear 'em." Inside, Jing Lin lit a small candle and placed it by the window. She whispered something in her own tongue. Mary couldn't understand the words, but the tone was full of gratitude and quiet promise. As the night deepened, the family sat together by the fire. The cottonwoods outside swayed in rhythm with the wind, their leaves shimmering silver. Mary leaned her head on Jinglin's shoulder, and the woman stroked her hair, humming softly, a tune without words, one that spoke of long roads and second chances. In that small cabin beneath the endless sky, three hearts that had once lived in silence found their harmony at last. Years later, Mary would remember that night as the moment the house finally felt whole. She would tell her children, "That was the day my mother was named, not by the preacher, not by the town, but by love itself." And if you're listening to this story now, wherever you are in the wide world, remember, sometimes kindness is the bravest rebellion, and love, the quietest revolution. If this tale found its way to your heart tonight, leave a word, a thought, or a prayer in its honor. Tell me where you're watching from, and come back again by this fire. Because stories like this, they still grow where mercy takes root.